So welcome everybody to Peers meeting this April. My name is Catherine Soka. I'm co-chair of Peer. And tonight we're privileged to have with us our Assemblymember Fred Thiele to tell us what the heck's going on up in Albany and to share about specific focus interest areas that Peer has. So just to start with a land acknowledgement, we are graced to live on the ancestral territories of the Montaukett and Shinnecock people. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, Peer is a multi-issue grassroots organization committed to advocating for issues that impact all Long Islanders, including healthcare, housing, climate, and social justice issues through electoral politics and activist issue-oriented engagements.
Right.
If you'd like to join Peer, you can drop into the chat, or you can see in the chat that I've dropped a link for you to actually join the organization. And let me just tell you a little bit about what to expect tonight. Fred is going to be with us for just under an hour. So we're going to focus our discussions with Fred on budget equity, voting reform, housing, and climate. There will be some time for Q&A at the end. After Fred leaves us, we will be joined by Melanie DeRigo, from the candidate for CD3. And she will talk to us because we're going to have a great meet and greet for Melanie this Thursday. So we're going to try to rally the troops to come on Thursday and meet Melanie. You won't be disappointed. And then Jerry's going to then go and talk a little bit about voting reform issues and voting issues regarding the upcoming primary and general elections. Okay, so without any further ado, Fred, we'd like you to maybe start by telling us a little bit about, what the heck did happen in the budget process, and why did the revenue that we raised with the Ione bills last year not go to the social legislation that we had prioritized? For instance, funds that were supposed to go to the foundation aid seem to have gone to charter schools. So if you could give us a little background.
Yeah, I actually kind of disagree with that, Catherine. And we look at the budget as a whole. It's a $220 billion. That's 220 with 9 zeros after it. When I go to middle schools and high schools and I try to explain to them the New York State budget and I say 220 billion, I always use the analogy that if you had $1 billion, which is 0.5% of the state budget, if you had it, 2,000 years ago, when Christ walked the earth 2,000 years ago, if you spent $1,000 a day, every day from that day until today, you'd still have $250 million. So that, that's how much money we're spending in the state budget. And overwhelmingly, the largest part of that budget goes to 2 areas. It goes to education and it goes to healthcare. Those are the things. Medicaid, education, those are the 2 biggest parts of our budget. So, I think to start out with, with regard to the budget is that, every budget cycle is unique. This one was particularly unique. And I would say, right off the bat, there was more money available to the state in dealing with this year's budget than ever before. And that was primarily for a couple of reasons. One is all of the federal money that came from Washington with the COVID bills that were passed at the beginning of the Biden administration provided a lot of aid, one-shot money, but aid to state government. And then second was tax revenue. And as you mentioned, we increased the rates on high earners last year. That generated additional revenue, and overall tax revenues bounced back faster than before, so than was expected. So, but with regard to education, actually we did really well with foundation aid. It was, foundation aid, for those of you that don't know, I mean, there was the Campaign for Fiscal Equity decision that goes back over a decade now, which was basically that the state education formula was unfair. And so the formula got revised. The foundation aid was supposed to make it all better, but it never got fully implemented. Partially because of the Great Recession. And then the former governor, Governor Cuomo, didn't seem particularly all that committed to fulfilling the pledge of the foundation aid formula. So, even on the east end of Long Island, we had school districts found, with regard to foundation aid. Two of the districts that I represent were getting their lowest share of the foundation aid in the state. Riverhead, very low. Hampton Bays, very low. So last year, when we did do the tax increase, part of that was a 3-year program to fully implement foundation aid. Every district last year was to get at least 60% of what they were entitled to in foundation aid. This year, 80%, and then next year to fully fund it. So last year, everybody got at least 60%, which was very good for districts like I said, Riverhead, Hampton Bays, my Brookhaven districts like William Floyd. They do very well because they are poorer districts. The wealthier districts, on the South Fork, a lot of them have been fully funded under foundation aid. So, this year, the increase in foundation aid was $1.5 billion. It was the highest increase in foundation aid in history. And it went to the districts that needed it most. And in addition, with regard to education, we also have lagged behind outside of New York City on universal pre-K. The city of New York has had universal pre-K program in place for several years. We have still been catching up, and we put $375 million into pre-K outside of the city of New York. So I would actually say that, as far as where did the money go, we did, extremely well with foundation aid. I think what you might be referring to with regard to charter schools is there's this, it's more of a New York City thing where they've got, a formula for charter schools that relates to state aid, but the amount of local effort they put in. So I think that charter schools might have benefited in the city of New York a little bit from that. But, as far as the state aid to education, foundation aid, we are really on the cusp right now of fully funding foundation aid for the first time since it was originally, supposed to be implemented in 2008. So, where I think, so I don't think it was education. I think we did very, very well. And, dealing with, NYSUT and our local school districts, I think people were pretty content with aid to education. Where I think we fell down was, as far as social spending goes, is that, last year we had funding for the Excluded Workers Fund, which did not get funded in this year's budget, even though there were applicants who the fund ran out of money last year. We're also promoting, a program for this year called Coverage for All, which I think you're also probably familiar with, which would have provided, a health insurance opportunity for undocumented New Yorkers. And that was kind of half a loaf. We kind of started referring it to as coverage for some. It went part of the way, but it didn't do what we wanted to do. So from my perspective, actually, we did very well in education. We didn't do so well in social spending related to health, healthcare, and assisting with income maintenance for undocumented workers that were impacted by the pandemic. By the way, one of the there's a lot of controversy with regard to the Excluded Workers Fund. I may have the percentage somewhat wrong, but somewhere in the neighborhood of like 80 to 90% of those that were beneficiaries of the Excluded Workers Fund had tax ID numbers. They pay taxes. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. The other place where I think we did well with the budget, and what I should have probably said at the outset is I've been doing this for 27 years, been through 27 budgets, and it's always kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So, education was good. Environment was good. We have a $4.2 billion bond act that voters will get the opportunity to vote on this November. That has a lot of money in it that is going to help us deal with some of our local environmental needs, but overall to deal with the issue of climate. I know that, in what you sent me, you wanted to talk about climate change. So, that bond act is critical. Fully funded environmental protection fund at $400 million. Water quality infrastructure, which very important on Long Island, fully funded again at $500 million. Money for the Peconic Estuary. Money for the local programs to upgrade septic systems to IA systems, nitrogen removing systems. So I thought environment was good also. In fact, I think I would argue that this is probably the best environmental budget that we've had probably since the middle 1990s. We have a bond act, which we haven't had in over 25 years. There's actually federal money available through the infrastructure bill, the Biden infrastructure bill that will go to some of the water quality and environmental green infrastructure that we need. So I thought that we did fairly well there. So, that a little bit of the good, I think, was in the environment and education. I think kind of the bad was on some of the social spending and the healthcare. And then there's the ugly, which is the football stadium in Buffalo. That was just ugly, right? And Catherine, you and I talk basketball from time to time, and I love sports and I love all sports. I don't think government should be subsidizing a billionaire's sports stadium anywhere. Not for the Islanders on Long Island, not for the Bills in Buffalo. And that was, to me, was a late add to the budget. It didn't show up until like the last week or 10 days. It really helped to contribute also to the late budget. But as we'll probably talk a little bit about later, the governor has the upper hand in the budget process in New York State, and so it got included, but it was not a to me, that was in the ugly category. So listen, there were other things that were in the budget that were of great local interest. We're going to have increased funding for mental health programs in our schools. We have an initiative for both the North Fork and South Fork schools that we work through Family Service League to provide in-school mental health services. So we were able to get that funded. There's $500 million in to help support offshore wind, which is evolving. That will be beneficial. Bridget Fleming's been working very hard on kind of reconstructing the Suffolk County bus system. It's been in the paper in the last couple of weeks. I was able to get $3.5 million added to the budget to support those improvements to the bus system, and of course, also related to transportation, we have a growing success with the South Fork commuter connection. With the train that brings workers across the canal in the morning. That's been a growing program. We were able to get more funding for that also. I mentioned the Peconic Estuary program. So, there certainly were some good things in there. There were some failures. I think there were some policy things. I had worked very hard. For example, I'm a co-sponsor of the of the clean slate bill, which, we had a lot of discussions and couldn't quite get across the finish line as part of the budget process, but I think is still alive for further discussions as we go into the second half of session. So
That's good news.
yeah, so that's kind of, I didn't hit everything, but I hopefully hit some high points and some low points, with regard to what was in the budget and what wasn't in the budget.
Well, first of all, Fred, thank you for, sort of illuminating the education issue. We appreciate that. And I just want to say that in terms of the feeling among the campaign for Ione is that while revenue was increased, there are programs that they feel the money should have gone to, and the Excluded Workers Fund, of course, is one of those. And we can circle back to you later with other programs that they would have liked to have seen funding go to. But let me ask you about the Budget Equity Act, which is a bill that would redistribute the power between the governor and the legislature. I wondered if you could share your thoughts about that with us.
Yeah, there's a couple of versions of that out there. I sponsor one with Assemblymember Gottfried, who is retiring this year after 52 years in the state assembly. But let me give just a little bit of context. When I was first in the legislature and during the Peconic years, there was a court case, Silver versus Peconic. You'll remember the names. And it really kind of tipped the balance of power as to who has the authority with regard to the budget. And it really kind of limited the ability of the legislature to change the governor's budget. We have to deal with the governor's budget, and we end up in a situation, not unlike this year, although it really wasn't, wasn't quite as confrontational as it was back in the Peconic years. But basically, the legislature gets put in the position of approving the governor's budget or facing the shutdown of the government, which are not, really great options if you're the legislature. It really limits our discretion. So, what this Budget Equity Act is really would overturn and overrule Silver versus Peconic and would give the legislature much more discretion to be able to amend the governor's budget. We wouldn't be hamstrung by that particular decision. It's a constitutional amendment. It's something that I support. When I went to Pearson High School, I was taught about the 3 equal branches of government, right? Equal branches of government. And with regard to the budget process, it isn't equal. When it comes to the budget, the governor has the upper hand. So, there's increasing talk about that, this is a year where if we gave it first passage this year, the next year's legislature after the election could give it second passage. It could be on the ballot as soon as 2023. So, I support it. I think that, I'm in the legislature. I think, the legislature should be an equal partner in the budget.
Do you think it has a chance of passing?
I think it's got more of a chance this year than it's had in a while. And I think it's largely, I think for 2 reasons. One is, the change on the executive level. There are certain things, and I've mentioned a couple of them already. There's certain things with the new governor that I agree with, certain things that I disagree with. But she isn't, compared to the former governor, this has been a much more collaborative process. And I think, and it's a constitutional amendment. The governor doesn't have to sign this thing. So, from listening to some of my colleagues, especially, seeing how at the end of the budget process, we did get, we did have to deal with some late initiatives and things like the football stadium that people weren't happy with. it just points out that regardless of who the personalities are that are sitting in the seat of the governor, the governor is the governor. And if they have that authority, they're going to tend to use it. And, we need to, I think, to recalibrate kind of the balance of power with regard to the budget. And it really does apply to the budget. When we're talking about, freestanding legislation, which is what we'll deal with the rest of the time, what the public thinks the balance is actually what it is. I mean, the legislature passes bills, the governor can veto them, but we can override vetoes. And, we have enough votes to override vetoes now, if that's the case. But again, we try to make it a collaborative process, but the budget process is out of whack. So that amendment, I think, is of critical importance.
I'm glad to hear that, Fred. I'm gonna pivot us to voting rights. But the other thing on the budget process, I think a complaint, not only the equity between the branches, has to do with the transparency and the timing of the budget. It's like for us, the citizens, everybody of New York, to have some kind of input or influence, to the budget process. I think there's an unhappiness related to that.
I would agree. And, the budget process, and, it's like every day, the budget process starts in sunshine and ends in darkness.
Yes.
The beginning of the process, the governor presents her budget in January. We have a lot of public hearings in the legislature. Every subject area, we have a public hearing. The public has the opportunity to participate. And then at the end, and, we're supposed to have conference committees. And they have been conference committees really in name only. We meet once at the beginning of the budget process. And it ends up, decisions either are made in our, in our individual conferences, about what priorities are. But I think in general, the end of the budget process has always lacked transparency. And, I'm not sure it was any worse this year, but it certainly wasn't any better.
But I guess my point is, will this Budget Equity Act help resolve some of that? And
I think just by having, having more equity among the branches of government will help that. But, what I would like to see, in addition to, just the legislature's ability to have greater discretion to modify the governor's budget.
Yes.
I would like to also see, conference committees, legislative conference committees actually be real, where we are in public, deciding at the end,
Yes.
How, what programs get funded.
Yes.
And, that's where I think where there could be greater transparency, where, listen, there's always going to be, there's always going to be, somewhat of three, we used to see three men in a room. Now it's two women and one man in a room, three people in a room.
And I'm not so sure.
Listen, there's always going to be some of those negotiations. I don't think you're ever going to completely eliminate that, but there could be much more of this process that could be utilized, that could be accomplished through conference committees than what we're doing now.
Right. Okay. So voting reform. I know we got a couple of things that was nice in the budget, such as postage paid for absentee ballots. And I think there was something related to the colleges where there will be a polling place on campus. If there's 300 or more students, I guess that would justify it. So I know those were a couple of things, but there were a number of things that did not. And just quickly, banning of the hybrid voting machines, the wrong church issue where a person goes to the wrong polling place and they do an affidavit ballot, and then it gets thrown out sort of in the end because they're in the wrong district, even though there are statewide races that they could have voted for, and some of those their vote could have counted. Reducing the registration deadline to 10 days, which would comply with the Constitution, and makes it closer to election day for people to change their registration. And then there was another thing.
John Lewis
Oh,
voting.
yes. How could I forget the biggest
Yeah.
one?
Yeah.
The John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act for New York. So those, if you could speak to those, I really appreciate it.
I think that all of those bills are very much alive. You know, they weren't handled in the budget. You know, the one thing about the budget process that we didn't talk about was, you know, this kind of push and pull. We just want to do the budget. We don't want to do policy in the budget, right?
Yes.
And then what that means in English is we don't want to do policy in the budget except the policy we want to do in the budget. There's always some policy that gets into the budget. And, you know, there was some of that, and, you know, one of them was kind of time sensitive, for example. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit, but revisions to the open meetings law, you know, to allow for hybrid meetings. That was a piece of policy that ended up, but it also ended up because the executive order was expiring on April 16th. But anyway, back to voting rights. So those were policies that didn't get done as part of the budget, but every single one of those bills that you mentioned, I think I'm a co-sponsor on most of them, if not all of them. But I think every one of those is alive and is on the agenda for the, you know, the remainder of the session when we're focusing on policy. So yeah. I don't have a prediction about, you know, which ones have the best chances of passage and which ones are going to pass, but I think there's strong support for them in both houses. And, you know, I can't think of any political reasons, you know, why we wouldn't want to do these bills. I mean,
yeah. Except maybe the one.
I mean, if you're looking at it from a partisan political perspective, they're all good for the majorities. I mean, they all enhance access to the ballot, which is number one, kind of what the majority stands for, and number two, on the whole, pretty good for them.
Right. I mean, the only one that maybe would be voting for incarcerated individuals, which we would like to see. But that, when you talk about being political, that's one that for given the climate these days.
Even Florida did that. I mean, right? So
right.
You know, not exactly the bastion of progressive policy. So I think they all have a shot. That's, you know, and I think they're and when I say that, I say that with some degree of optimism. I think the voting bills are something that I think is one of those nice situations where politics and policy line up, you know, in a way that I think is hopeful.
If I could go back to climate change for just a moment, because there's one thing, you know, you're saying that there was a fair amount, or you feel was very favorable to climate, but we have the CLCPA, and it has been determined by NYSERDA that we would need like $10 billion for 30 years to fund. So when we look at the amount of money that was put toward, you know, in this budget, I mean, we're nowhere near what those estimates are. So how are we ever going to achieve those important goals that we've codified? We've legislated this, but so how are we going to achieve?
Well, they're goals, and some of it's money and some of it's policy. I mean, you know, some of the things that we're talking about is, you know, zero emission cars, zero emission buses, school buses. That was in the budget. So, you know, we just have to keep, you know, pounding away at that. I mean, I think the Bond Act's going to do more than you think, I think, with regard to.
But it has to be voted on.
It has to be voted on. And I look at that as a dual task of, we need the money, but it's also an opportunity to educate the public about, you know, why all this is so important as far as a referendum campaign goes too.
Yeah, I'll just interject that Francesca dropped into the chat that the goals they're mandatory. They're not discretionary. So I don't know.
But whether they're mandatory or discretionary, you still got to meet them. And, it is, and they're aggressive goals. So,
Right.
every year that goes by. But listen, as I said, wasn't perfect, but I thought that overall, what was in the budget was a pretty good start.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and also just like to thank you, Fred, for supporting so many issues that we support and that aren't popular in Albany, and you've done that for years. And, climate is just not an issue that we have to keep our eyes on the prize there, because we're not going to be, because climate disasters are becoming increasingly more frequent in our community, and living by the shore, we know we're always one storm away from real catastrophe.
Well, if we're going to fund this, one of the bills that I did sponsor, which, has been pilloried a lot by the other side, it was, I won't get the acronym right, but it was like, Assemblyman Cahill's carbon tax, which somehow got translated into a 55-cent a gallon gas tax, which I've read the bill many times. There's no gas tax in there, but it does make the polluters pay. So, but, we're going to need an initiative like that, I think, which, in an election year, to be honest, I'm not sure I see that moving, but, one way or another, we're going to have to, come up with that kind of revenue source,
Yeah.
Well, also speaking about other sort of bills that may come up now that the budget's been passed, if you could just take a moment or two and talk about your thoughts on where the New York Health Act is and some of the other carceral reform acts that you've supported and that we have, like elderly parole and fair and timely parole. What do you feel they'll be coming up for a vote, and will they succeed?
Yeah, well, I am not optimistic. Well, I'm optimistic about clean slate because that close, I thought, during the budget process. So, Catalina Cruz has worked like you wouldn't believe. I mean, she's just been incredible the way she has advocated for that bill. So, and I've met with her several times. She knows I have good relationships with other suburban members that are somewhat reluctant on that bill, and we've tried to bring some of them along. So I feel good about the clean slate bill. That's a bill that I think is alive as we go forward.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about some of the other criminal justice bills. Everything has got kind of, you folks know I support what I support. And then I try to give you an honest assessment of where I think stuff is.
Right.
And I'm just not sure in the legislature whether there's the stomach to do a lot more criminal justice stuff this year after after the way the bail reform stuff got dealt with. So, that's my honest assessment. I think the best chance is clean slate. That's my sense of it. And the New York Health Act, I think, again, you got to keep pushing the ball down the field. But I had some hope. Dick Gottfried's swan song, started in the legislature in 1970. That this would be his parting gift, as it were.
Yeah.
But I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen. And I think. I think it's just, I'm not sure that the climate's going to be right for that. I mean, I thought some of the air came out of the balloon, for this after the Democratic primaries in 2020, where, the way that it kind of got dealt with there. So, listen, I always tell this story, you all know that I'm, probably the thing that will be in either the first or the second paragraph of my obituary, which I'm hoping doesn't get written anytime soon, but it will be the Community Preservation Fund. And I always remind people that, that was an overnight success that took 13 years to pass.
Right.
And I could point to other, pieces of legislation, you know, the bill on, you know, the anti-discrimination bill, you know, based on sexual orientation. I was a college intern when Assemblyman Bill Passanante introduced that bill in the 1970s, and you know, it took 30 years, but it happened. So, you know, my best assessment is that this is not going to be the year for the New York Health Act, but that doesn't mean you don't keep trying to move the ball down the field.
Mhm. Well, we certainly are and will continue to do that. And it's also very good to put it into the context of how long it took other bills that we now seem were no-brainers, how long it took for them to actually pass. And speaking of the Community Preservation Fund, we'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about the bill that was signed, your bill that was signed by the governor on the Affordable Housing Fund, and what we can do, maybe talk a little bit about it and what we can do to help you with that going forward.
Yeah, the Community Housing Fund is the sister of the Community Preservation Fund. We're not changing the Community Preservation Fund. We're not adding housing to it. We're keeping them separate, dedicated funds. The voters voted for one. We want the voters to vote for the other. The only thing they share in common is a funding source, which is the use of a real estate transfer tax. But to say that they're the same fund would like be saying that, well, the police fund and the highway fund are the same fund because they're both funded through the real property tax. The only thing that the two share basically is the use of the real estate transfer tax. So listen, I don't have to tell you how critical housing is on the East End. Every policy discussion that I have, you know, on the East End ultimately comes around to affordable housing. And it's only been exacerbated by the pandemic, where supply is down, price is up, and it's harder than ever for local businesses to find workers. It impacts traffic, it impacts everything, in our daily lives on the East End. So, the Community Housing Fund, as I said, is kind of the sister of the Community Preservation Fund. It's a dedicated fund. It's an additional 0.5% on the real estate transfer tax. And it also increases the exemptions, by the way. The exemption goes on the South Fork from 250,000, the first 250,000, to the first 400,000. So actually, if your transaction is $1 million or less, which there aren't many of on the East End right now, but for under $1 million, actually you pay less tax than you would pay now with the increase in the exemption. It's a dedicated fund, and the money would be used for, basically every possible, alternative, assistance for first-time home buyers, rental housing, home ownership, public-private partnerships, rehabilitating existing buildings, converting them to housing, accessory dwelling units, everything that you can think of, this fund could be used for that purpose. We kept it broad and flexible. Every town is different. The approach will probably be different in each town, but we can't build our way out of this crisis. We have to have a way to make existing housing reachable for people also through either down payments or shared equity or things of that nature. So, that's what the bill does. And, again, as I say, it is a separate fund, but, the process that has to happen now is, and that's what I'll focus on a little bit, is what has to happen and basically what role could peer play here. And, the governor signed the bill last October. It's authorizing legislation. It authorizes each town, each East End town, it authorizes them to create a community housing fund. But now the ball is in the court of each town. And for the housing fund to be a reality, the towns have to do a couple of different things. One, they have to pass a local law to create the fund and authorize the 0.5% real estate transfer tax. They also have to create and pass a housing plan. In essence, the housing plan will tell the public how they're going to spend the money. Just like with the Community Preservation Fund, there was a Community Preservation Fund plan. The public knew what properties and how the town was going to spend the money. Same with housing. They have to, before the referendum, the towns have to produce a plan, adopt a plan, and tell the public how they're going to spend the money. And then finally, there has to be a referendum, which would be scheduled for this November. So it's almost May, and election day is in November. It's basically 6 months. So, you know, if you've been reading the papers, all the towns seem to be moving forward with, you know, creating their local laws to implement the fund, working on their plans. So, you know, the towns have to have public hearings to do those. I would certainly urge people that support this, you know, from Pier to, you know, to attend those public hearings and show support for the community housing fund. And the other thing I think is, you know, we need to build a coalition over the summer and into the fall. And, you know, I'll be in touch with Pier and other organizations. As you know, I think we need a kind of the same kind of broad-based coalition we needed for the Community Preservation Fund. You know, organizations such as Pier have an interest in this, but so do local business groups, so do local employers, and you know, this local schools. You know, they have difficulty hiring teachers. The local hospital. You know, everybody I think has an interest in you know, dealing with our housing problems. So, you know, in the short run, you know, attend the town public hearings in your respective towns as the towns move forward with implementation. And then, you know, we're going to try to put together a campaign this summer and fall, you know, to try to educate people and advocate for the fund. And you know, but that's why the plan is so important, because you know, if you're going to do advocacy, you know, people are, before they vote for something, especially a tax, they want to know how the money is going to be spent. So we're waiting for the towns to do that. So.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for putting that legislation forward. I mean, housing has been critical for 2 decades, so we really need to move quickly on that. And
well, you know, to talk about what we did, like with the New York Health Act, you know, the community housing fund is also about 15 or 16 years old. You know, right after we did the Community Preservation Fund, it was so successful, we knew we needed kind of the counterpart for housing. But, you know, it was the political will to do it. You know, I couldn't even find a sponsor in the Senate for that bill for like, you know, the first 10 years. So, you know, people were nervous about another tax. They were nervous about touching affordable housing. As you know, affordable housing projects, the way why I tell people we need to work harder on this referendum for housing, I kind of explain it in shorthand by saying, you know, most people I know, you know, they don't mind living next to a nature preserve. It's a little different with regard to affordable housing projects. So, you know, there's a lot of work. This is not a referendum that's going to sell itself. We're going to have to really do a lot of advocacy for it. You know, it's not automatic. We're going to need to do some work here.
well, listen, Fred, we are right there with you, and you should know that Pier, as a member, Pier's membership voted this past year to prioritize issues, and housing was one of the top 3. And so we are linked. We are a sister organization to East End YIMBY, and we work together with them to show up to public hearings. So we will absolutely be helping you there.
That's where I'm going at 7 o'clock. By
I know,
the way,
we know.
And
I'm going to encourage people after our meeting is over to go and join you there as well. But let's go to questions, because a few people have already dropped some questions or raised their hand. So we have Francesca first, then Catherine Levy, and then Jackie Gavron. So Francesca, please, if you would unmute yourself and ask.
And first of all, I want to thank Fred a whole lot for coming here, and also for being such a champion on so many of the issues that are important to us, including the environment. However, I'd like to ask you, Fred, why, on the one hand, you have wonderfully supported 3 out of the 4 bills in the Renewable Heat Now campaign. You've supported funding renewable heating and weatherization, ending subsidies for new gas hookups, making the utilities plan for an equitable transition to electrification, but you have not yet supported the all-electric new construction, the banning gas hookups in new construction after 2027, the All-Electric Building Act. And this is really the linchpin of this campaign, because buildings are the largest single source of emissions, of carbon emissions in New York State. And it's really critical that we transition. So I know that the oil and gas industry have been putting out a lot of misinformation about this bill. Just outright lies, and they're really gearing up about it. And I'm just wondering why you are not supporting the all-electric buildings.
Well, I'm not a co-sponsor of it yet. I didn't say I'm not supportive. And my focus really is on making sure that we have a realistic date that works. I mean, one bill is 2027, which I'm kind of okay with. And another bill was like 2024, which I'm not sure is realistic. So it's not about the goals. It's not about the bill. I think the discussion has to be about the date. And I don't get a lot of support from the oil or gas industry, Francesca. But you're right. But but also there's I'm talking with some of our local builders too, and what's realistic. So I'm trying to it's more about what's the right date. It's not the goal, and that's why I express support for the concept, but I'm still grappling with what's the right deadline, and and that's really where I'm at.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Catherine Levy, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Fred, for coming here. And thank you. I want to go back to the New York Health Act. And, all of us at Peer who worked with you on this issue know how deeply and genuinely committed you are to it. And we all appreciate it. But realistically, given the governor's power in this state, as long as there's a governor who doesn't support the New York Health Act, will the leadership in the legislature ever allow it to come to a vote? I'm not talking about this year. I mean, next year or the year after.
I think so. Yeah. And you're right. I don't think it's this year, but obviously, especially the way the budget process is structured now, even regardless, I mean, having the support of the governor is extremely helpful with a major initiative like this. It's hard to get to the finish line, with a big initiative like this if the governor isn't supportive of it. But I certainly don't think that doesn't mean that the legislature if wouldn't work to put it on the governor's desk. I mean, we get the governor vetoes our bills. We don't not pass bills because we think the governor might veto them. But it would certainly be easier if we had a governor that supported it, though. I'm not going to deny that. But I still don't think that's going to stop us ultimately from the legislature from exercising our independence and supporting it. I mean, for many years the Assembly passed it and the Senate didn't when it was under Republican control, and it hasn't. We haven't seen any movement on it, and certainly in the last 2 years, and that's a little bit troubling. Not so much this year. I kind of understand this year, but I thought we had kind of an opportunity last year. And again, the governor, neither governor, Cuomo certainly wasn't helpful, and so far Governor Hochul really hasn't said much one way or another about.
Well, how about, I'm sorry to talk over you, but I'm just curious about your comments on Hastings and his position on it.
Yeah, I think, listen, it's come up for a vote while he's been the speaker. I think kind of Dick Gottfried has been, I can't go to my mailbox every day, in Albany without, there being some piece of mail from Dick Gottfried about the New York Health Act. You can't have a bigger and better champion than he has been. And I think the question is going to be, who's going to be the next chairman of the Health Committee in the New York State Assembly, and are they going to pick up the mantle of the New York Health Act? I'm sure somebody will, but it's hard to imagine a greater champion of the New York Health Act than Dick Gottfried.
That's a great point. That's a very good point. Thank you. Jackie has her hand up, and she may be the last question because we're running low on time. Jackie, please.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Jackie Gavron is the person who had her hand up.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Hey, Jackie. Okay, I'll make this quick. Fred, thinking about what happened last year with the referendum on the voter propositions, the same-day registration, and I guess the question is, who's responsible? I feel like the state Democratic Party hasn't, or the Long Island, I'm just going to be frank, hasn't done anything in terms of messaging, and I'm concerned that that's going to happen again. And whose responsibility is that to do? I mean, if the legislature is, putting something on the ballot, how come they have signposts and we don't ever do anything? Because that's the biggest danger, the way that I see it.
It's like town government with referenda. We in government, I mean, individually we can express our opinions, but we can't spend taxpayers' dollars advocating for these referenda. But I think the voter referenda, the failure of those propositions last year was twofold. One is it was like the worst election mix of turnout that you could have possibly had. I mean, so it was a low. Democrats didn't come out, Republicans came out. Conservative party spent a lot of money on those propositions. So I think one of the things was just that it was a bad climate. But the second part is that everybody got caught sleeping. Nobody did any. Whether you want to put it on the Democratic Party or you want to put it on, that advocates should have gotten together and put together a campaign. The opponents sure did. So I think, I don't want to sugarcoat it. I think, the proponents of those propositions got caught sleeping. I mean, that's what happened, and I certainly could make the argument, that, the Democratic Party certainly should have played a role. But I could make the argument that maybe a lot of us should have played a role. I'm not just trying to put it on, them. Although the conservatives the Conservative Party, not conservatives with a small c. The Conservative Party cleaned everybody's clock. They spent money. They had a couple of big donors that put a lot of money, and they focused. They ran. I'll give them credit. They ran a good campaign. And when I say a good campaign, not that I thought they made good arguments, but they had a very targeted campaign, and that combination plus the composition of who came out to vote was a pretty deadly combination.
If I may, I'm on the East Hampton Democrats, so I'm going to be out there knocking on doors for the referendum with everybody else. But and you'll just have to forgive me for being blunt. It's just kind of, I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. I really think, activists don't have the budget to make those kind of signposts and everything. And I really think it's time for a change in leadership of the state Democratic Party.
You're not the first person to say that.
And Long Island. And, I was at a local fundraiser, and I spoke to Jay Jacobs, and he said it wasn't his job, but his job is just housekeeping. And it was really just outrageous. So I really think it's time for him to go. Thanks for hearing me out.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
There's no leadership.
Yeah, and there could have been leadership on those issues. I mean, the Conservative Party might have got the drop on it, but I just think people didn't see I think people thought there was a Republican wave last year, but it was more like a tsunami. It really wasn't just a wave. And you know, you could make the argument that leaders, you know, the person in the street might not see it, but leaders should see it.
That's right. They're not doing their job.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Jackie.
I
Now,
gotta get to YIMBY in 4 minutes, but I saw Joanne's post here. I want to talk about the LIPA, the Public Power Commission. I just want to, you know, we got that in the budget to create the commission. There's $2 million in it. And the question basically is, what's going on with that? You know, we returned to Albany yesterday. I expect the commission, the members of the commission to be named, the members of the advisory commission to be picked. I expect this to get off the ground in the next week or so. We have a very aggressive timeline to do this work, and we need to get going quickly. So you'll be hearing more about this, but you know, we're just getting it. We got it passed in the budget. We're just getting it off the ground, and I'm thrilled about this. I've been working on public power, you know, since the anti-Shoreham days when I was first in the county legislature. I see Bill Chaliff. He almost has a smile on his face about this one. But it was back to get to the original intent of what LIPA was supposed to be about. And I'm gonna part with that. And I want to thank you all for your time. And you know, I look forward to working with you on the Community Housing Fund and getting that passed, and on the LIPA Commission and so many of the other issues that we talked about tonight. So thanks a lot. I hate to be like talk and run, but I gotta go.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Listen,
All right,
Fred, thank you. Thank you so
Right.
much for your time. We'll be in touch. If there's other questions for Fred that folks have, you can drop them in the chat and we will get answers from him for you. But now we're pleased to say that we have another dynamic leader on our Zoom call who is running a terrific campaign in CD3. She is going to be in our community this Thursday at 6:30 at a meet and greet for Melanie Dorigo. And I hope that everyone here on the call can join us on Thursday night. So she's just going to say hello and give a 5-minute update on her dynamic campaign. So would you all just give a Zoom welcome to Melanie Dorigo.
Well, hello, Peter. It's so nice to be here. And I can't see all of your faces because, as you can see, I'm in my car, but I know there's a lot of amazing folks on this call. I know I've popped into some of your meetings in the past, and I'm really excited to be here, even just for a few minutes tonight. As Catherine said, I will be in your neck of the woods on Thursday night, and I would love to meet some of you in person. Look, you know, I kind of caught the end of what Fred was saying, and you know, I think my race, what we're doing, the work that we have done for years, not just in CD3, but all over Long Island, is really important because, you know, the progressive advocacy, the progressive organizing is really manifesting itself in my race. For those of you who don't know, I ran in this race in 2020. I challenged the status quo. I brought to light progressive policy positions and why they mattered and how they would improve material conditions in people's lives, even when they told me I would never win, even when they told me I was crazy. Fast forward to today, progressive policies in CD3 are polling at the top, but yet still we're hearing this rhetoric about centrism. And frankly, if we want to win any races, we better have Democrats that are fighting for people, people first policies, and in my opinion, progressive policies. So, you know, while obviously a lot of you are not living in my district in CD3, I want you to know that I am representing what I believe, you know, the progressive wing of the party is the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, and I will be a representative for all of you. We're going to make history with this seat. You know, I will be the first progressive to ever be elected on Long Island. I'll be the first woman to ever represent NY3. I think we've got a lot of important legislative fights ahead, you know, certainly on a federal level that will require hire a real fighter in office, and I believe I've got the fight to do that. Another important piece of this race, and we're already starting to see sort of the down ballot effects, right? You start to see a lot of the Long Island Five and even certain Assembly folks who somehow always find a way not to be on our side, when we're during our advocacy meetings. We're starting to see them get a little bit nervous because they're watching our campaign catch fire. They're watching us bring new people into the fold in a time where it is very, very difficult to get people engaged. Everyone's got COVID fatigue. Everyone is, a little bit like needing some personal care at this particular moment. So to see our race and to see our army of volunteers coming out, I think it's making them nervous, and that's a very good thing, because it's going to be hard to dodge us when we call them and say, can you support the New York Health Act, when I'm fighting for Medicare for all and talking about the benefits at a federal level. And I think that is true across the board, on the array of issues. So I think it's a real incredible opportunity. And now that it's an open primary, I think we've got, such a shot at this. And I would just, want to express my gratitude to the work that you all do, the hard work of organizing your community, of being those lone voices in the room and standing up for what is just and what is right. That is so important. And we need a million more of you out there in the world. But if you have some time on Thursday night and you could come out, we would love to meet you in person. I'd love to tell you more about the campaign, our path to victory, and just all the exciting work that we've been doing around Long Island.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
Melanie.
so much. Yes, Catherine, thank you so much. And hi, Jerry, I see you on my screen. Jerry went petitioning with me up in City Island and Larchmont, around
All
the
over.
new C3. Yes.
Really good.
So listen, if I may, I just want to say one thing, and then I want to pass it over to Catherine Levy. For everybody on the call, I cannot say how strongly I believe that Melanie is kind of a once-in-a-generation leader on Long Island. We just heard from another one, Fred Thiele, and I believe that Melanie is going to be walking forward with similar footsteps in the years to come. And throughout COVID, we have learned how important it is to not only worry about our own district, but what really happens island-wide. And that's why we are reaching out to support Melanie. We feel she has a strong chance in CD3. And I'm going to just be quiet now because I know Catherine Levy wants to speak to this as well. And she is potentially more eloquent than I. So let me pass it over. Catherine, please.
Oh God, I hate being introduced that way. Okay, but so I completely lose my words when I'm introduced that way. But I want to echo what Catherine said. I too think that Melanie has the potential to be a really once in a lifetime congressperson from Long Island, one of the great progressive spokespeople. For those of you who care about Medicare for all, there's only one other person in the Congress whom I think speaks as eloquently about Medicare for all as Melanie does, and that's Katie Porter. And I have this fantasy in my mind of Katie Porter and Melanie Dorigo being on the same committee. And I think if they were fighting together, we would get Medicare for all. But Melanie is fighting for a whole host of issues. I have been on Zoom meetings with her for 2 years when the cameras are off, when no one is looking, and she walks the walk. She is a committed activist who's passionate about creating a more just world. She's not the typical politician, and she's going to go to Washington and be a real fighter. But I have to be honest, she's up against people who have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in money, and we know that money makes a difference. So we need people out here who care about the issues that Melanie supports to come out and support her. And I have to tell you that if you feel discouraged, as I do just about every other day, having a couple of hours with Melanie Dorigo is going to make you feel like you're floating on a cloud. So come out to the meeting on Thursday, and I think that she'll inspire you as much as she inspired me over the years.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, right. And she's not taking corporate money. So she needs our nickels and dimes and hundreds.
I just want to say one other thing. Actually, Jerry told me about petitioning with Melanie in City Island, and someone confronted Jerry about bail reform. And Jerry's quite articulate, and she was trying to explain it to him. But she said, but then I handed it over to Melanie, and he became a convert within 15 minutes because she explained things in very generous, rational terms. It's remarkable to be able to communicate that well, and to show that, you know, what we call progressive policies are just humane, common sense, rational policies.
Yeah.
Great.
So Melanie, thank you for taking a few moments out of your canvassing day to meet with us. And I urge everybody, I just dropped into the chat the link to the meet and greet on Thursday. Please register. The address is also in the chat. It's at Katerina Masarovich's home in Wainscott. Please join us. And we do, you know, Long Island has expensive races. So a candidate that does not take corporate donors needs our help. Let's get Melanie, let's have her win the primary and then get her into office next November.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Melanie. Thank you. And we'll let you get
Thank
back
you.
to canvassing.
All
My
right.
God,
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
everyone. I
Get
appreciate
out
all
the
of you.
vote.
Yes, I hope to meet many of you on Thursday. Thank you so much for your support.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Mel.
Okay, Jerry?
Okay, so let's move on and talk briefly about voting. I dropped in the chat a few times. There's a couple of links there. One is to the Board of Elections, and it has the calendar for the deadlines for early voting and registration, et cetera, for the rest of the year. But in addition to that, it has a link to the section that deals with absentee voting. And I wanted to just talk about that briefly because there's been a change related to this. And it's important that we all know it because we've been promoting extensively for everybody during COVID, et cetera, to use absentee ballots. And it's been terrific. It's helped us greatly. But we now need to know that if we apply for an absentee ballot and one is issued to you, if you decide you didn't want to use that and you want to go and vote in early voting or on election day itself, you can vote, but you cannot vote in the machine. You will be filling out an affidavit ballot that will then go back to the Board of Elections to be counted outside of the machine, you know, of that day. It won't be in the general election or in the early voting tabulation. So it's really important that you know that and share that with as many people as you know related to this. And, you know, if anyone has any questions about this, maybe I can answer them or, you know, call the Board of Elections. But I've gotten this verified and I was trying to copy the specific language and put it in the chat, but I can't copy it from the Board of Elections website for some reason onto the chat. But I also just wanted to briefly say, PEER does have a voting team, a subcommittee, our registration, voting, and elections team. And we've been working and we've done a few things. We've done a postcard campaign for Melanie since we formed a few months ago. And we did a thing when there was the Valentine's Day, when it was the deadline for registration. We did a publicity informational thing about that to all the activist groups and you know, spread the word on that. But I'm putting a plug in there. I put my email in the chat for anyone who's interested to please join us and participate in some of our activities, you know, going forward. We'd love to have you on board. The more the merrier. So anything else I can share, Catherine, KS or KL or Tina Jacobowitz, you're on the committee. And
I'm
I'm
just
on this
wondering,
call.
Jerry,
Yeah.
if we got absentee ballots in the past, are they going to automatically send them to us?
I don't know that. I would doubt that given this law because, you know, that it's sort of conflicting if they do that. They're automatically issuing and I don't know the answer to that. So I recommend
Call the
calls to the
women-
Board of Election to
Board of
find that
Election.
out specifically. If you've been on
Yeah,
historic.
'cause I don't want an absentee ballot. I want to vote early.
Yeah, because when you file for an absentee ballot, you can say, I want this forever, or, you know, for the whole year, et cetera. And, you know, then you're automatically
Remember what
getting.
we did.
Yeah, right.
I think
So
we did get them, but we were able to go vote anyway, but now they've changed the rules.
that's right. That's right. And this had to do with the feature because they wanted to be able to count the absentee ballots earlier than just, you know, not have to start a week after election night. And so this was the, I want to say compromise, but in order to enable them and not have a conflict for person who's voted absentee and then is, you know, or hasn't, and going into the machine and risking, you know, duplication. This was the trade-off for that, so that we can get our election results sooner.
Yeah,
So-
but that's a good question. So we'll check into that. I'm sure Jerry will check into that. Jerry, did you want to say anything about early voting to let people know about early voting?
Well, that definitely is, you know, on the calendar on that link, but I will quickly, I know it starts June. We have our early voting, which begins, I guess, June 19th. If I've got that right. Yes, begins on June 19th, and it runs through the 26th. That's the Sunday before the Tuesday of primary voting day. So again, early voting is where, you know, you can go to any early voting site and vote there. You don't have to just do the one in your district, because there aren't as many, you know, early voting sites as there are election day for every single ED or district. So, and that's been terrific. More and more people are doing early voting. It's so convenient. It's wonderful. You know, you do it on your own time. Many choices. There's evenings and weekends, you know, for 9 solid days. And it's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And before I ask Catherine Levy to tell us a little bit about our next meeting, I just want to see if there's any questions that folks might have before we kind of come to a close. If not, then our next meeting will be on May 24, which is a Tuesday night, and it will be at 6 o'clock. And Catherine has been able to get the Lieutenant Governor candidate, Ana Maria Archila, to agree to join us. So Catherine, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know how many people know Ana Maria. She's been a very important activist in New York for a long time, one of the founders of Make the Road, for instance, and she's going to join us for the first half hour of our meeting on the 24th and talk about her vision for New York. She's extraordinary. I mean, the idea of electing her and Melanie Dorigo in 1 year, it really excites me. So I hope that you can come and listen to her.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And, you know, as many of you know, there's been a recent dropout in the Lieutenant Governor's race. So it is, Ana Maria has a really strong chance of winning. And so again, it's a reason to promote the primaries coming up in June, to make sure, like Fred said, let's not drop the ball. Let's get people out to vote. And that's why what Jerry and her committee are doing is so very important, to try to get the word out about that.
I just wanted to say something about the meet and greet on Thursday. If you don't feel like donating, it's perfectly fine to come there and not donate anything and just get to know Melanie and decide whether you want to support her or not. She's an amazing person to talk to, let me tell you.
Thank you. Yeah, agreed. And so, and if anybody has any questions about it, you can contact either Jerry or me afterward. So I think that pretty much brings our meeting to a conclusion.
I just want to say, Catherine, if people have not paid their 2022 dues, Catherine will put something in the chat, and maybe you could send a notice to people to pay their dues for 2022.
Okay, there it is in the chat. Time to join, to rejoin, renew your membership in Peer, and the next email that goes out will also include that. But why wait? Seize the moment. Click on that link right now. We would appreciate that.
Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, so thank you all. I hope you have a good evening. I'm also going to drop one last thing in the chat, and that is going to be the link to the YIMBY meeting where Fred went to. And I do encourage those who can to go over and listen in, not only to Fred, but to what they're planning on doing. They've come up with a really nice methodology to go to a lot of the town board meetings to advocate for housing projects or legislation that the different townships have on at their meetings. So if you have the time, zip on over there. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good night and spread the word about the elections, and see you Thursday at the meet and greet for Melanie.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.